Today we're going to continue our discussion with functions and relations, with function rules and dealing a little bit more with domain and range and what that all looks like. So we're going to focus on function rules first. And so a function rule is an equation that describes a function. You can think of a function as an input-output machine. So when you were in elementary school, maybe it was middle school, you might have had something that looks like this. That, let's just say our function is to take whatever our x value is and add 3 to it. So we would have some sort of input. So in here we would plug in some sort of number. Let's just say we plug in 7, and it goes into the function machine, and the function machine tells it to take x, that number we just plugged in, and add 3 to it, whatever it was, and out would pop 10. That's a function rule. X plus 3 is the function rule. What do you do when you take something that you're inputting? How does it change to give you the output? Okay? So let's refresh our memory with input and output from last time. The input is going to be our x's, what we're plugging in there. So that means that that is going to be our domain. The output, what we get out after we perform a calculation, whatever that calculation is going to be the y value. So that's going to be the range. Okay, so input is domain. Domain, we know from before, is our x's. Okay, output is the range, and we know that range is the same thing as y. And this is also something called function notation that we're going to talk a little bit more about here in just a moment. So making sure that you're understanding, I could ask you for domain, input, x's, all asking the same thing. Range, output, f of x, y. This is f of x. So this right here is said f of x. Okay? All of those mean the same thing. So just be aware, you need to know what all of these vocabulary words mean. So the first thing we're going to do is work on evaluating a function rule for a particular value. So if I ask you to evaluate f of x equals negative 3x minus 10 for x equals 6, this f of x is just the same thing as saying y. If I asked you, okay, giving you y equals negative 3x minus 10, and I know that x equals 6, what are we going to do with that? We're taking this 6, and we're going to plug it in for the x's. We're going to plug it in for that x, and for that x, and however many x's might happen. So f of 6, whatever number's in that parentheses, is just what we're plugging in for x. That means we're going to have negative 3 times, instead of x, we're going to put 6. And then minus 10. So then we're going to do that calculation. And negative 3 times 6 is negative 18. And minus 10 would give us negative 28. So when we evaluate f of x equals negative 3x minus 10 for x equals 6, or when we find f of 6, we get negative 28 out as our answer. The input was 6. The output was negative 28. The domain was 6. The range is negative 28. All things that are interchangeable with each other. Okay, so if we have f of n equals negative 2x squared plus 7, and we're going to evaluate that for n equals negative 4, what are they asking us to do? They're going to be asking us to find f of negative 4. Taking that n value, and this should also be an n there. So since we have n's here, we have to have n's in the question. Anytime we see an n, what are we going to place it? What are we going to replace it with for this particular question? They specifically asked us to take n equals negative 4. So we have negative 2 times negative 4. That looks really bad right now, but that's okay. Negative 4 plus, oh my goodness, plus 7. All right, so with this, let me write it again down here. Okay, so forget this for a second. All right, so we have this. You can either do the math by hand, or you can actually, and I forgot this word here, or you can actually just type it in and see what happens to it. So if we're doing order of operations, that means that we would take negative 4 squared first, and get a positive 16. And then we would add 7 to it. So negative 2 times 16 is negative 32. And adding 7 to it would give us negative 25. And that's our answer. When you input a nice easy number, whether it's positive, negative, a decimal, a fraction, you're going to get a nice number out. Meaning it doesn't have to necessarily be pretty, I guess we'll say. It could still be a decimal, it could still be a fraction, something like that, but you're inputting a value and you should be getting a value out. You shouldn't have any variables left in your work. Okay, so that's evaluating for just one value, whatever it happens to be. So what happens if they ask us this type of question? They say evaluate the function rule f of a equals negative 3a plus 5 to find the range of the function for the domain negative 3, 1, and 4. They've given us the domain. What does domain mean? What do each of these values represent? Domain is the input. Typically it's the x, but what variable have they given us here? Our input variable is going to be a. So they've ultimately just told us that a is going to equal negative 3, a is going to equal 1, and a is going to equal 4. And we're in 3 different situations, and we need to find the range values that go with those 3 situations. So I'm going to kind of block these off from each other. All that means now, if we're going to evaluate this function for negative 3, we're going to find f of negative 3. Well, what does that mean? We're going to plug this value of negative 3 in for a in that original function. So we would have negative 3 times our a value is also negative 3 plus 5. So negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. Plus 5 means we have a, oh goodness, we have 14 as our answer. Let me write that again down here. 14 as our answer. Okay, so f of negative 3 is 14. Let's try this with a equals 1. So we're going to have f of 1 now. What does that mean? That value in that parenthesis is what gets plugged in for a. So negative 3 times 1 is negative 3, plus 5 is a positive 2. So that's our answer, f of 1 equals 2. And last one, if we have a equals 4, so we're going to find f of 4. And so 4 is what we're plugging in for a. Negative 3 times 4 is negative 12, plus 5 would give us a negative 7. So we've found the range values, and now we just need to list them out in the proper form. So remember, from yesterday, domain and range, doesn't matter which one it is, needs to be in fancy brackets, listed in order from least to greatest, and not repeating. So our smallest one of these 3 would be negative 7, then we would have 2, and then we would have 14. And that would be the answer to this question. So it's given you the domain. There's 3 different values for the domain. You have to plug each of those things in. So it's almost like 3 questions in one. Evaluate those. You don't have to show your work here. You can literally just type them in exactly as you've written them, though, and see what they give you, and then put them in order from least to greatest, not repeating fancy brackets.